The sun has gone down, which means I have energy again, because apparently I only have energy when it's nighttime. And my dog seems to have developed some sort of light sensitivity, as well as like a desire to sleep in like enclosed dark spaces. I don't know. She's strange. So I think I'm gonna try making one of these like cat caves for my dog out of sewing, using specifically jelly roll, rug, and basket sewing techniques. And I'm also gonna like make her like a little cushion for in there. So we gotta start with this beehive sort of situation before I can add like a bottom and a cushion. And I think I'm gonna stuff the cushion, like the actual like bed part of the dog bed, with some of my scraps, because I always have scraps. So first things first, I have to cut a whole bunch of strips of quilting cotton. I'm gonna be trying out using this fringe cut ruler that, technically speaking, I guess is for fringe, but I'm going to use it for this because I need a whole bunch of 2.5-inch wide strips, and there are slits in this ruler every 1/2 inch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slits over, that would be 2.5 inches. And then I could put my rotary cutter in there, cut, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again. There's my next one, put my rotary cutter in there and cut. Now, I would like to take this time to note that you should be very, very careful when using this type of ruler, if you have this type of ruler, because most of the time when I use rotary cutter rulers, I use them in a way that you can feel the edge of the ruler, so you're not really in danger of cutting your fingers. Unfortunately, with this type of ruler, you are very much in danger of cutting your fingers, because you're cutting in the middle of the ruler, so you can't feel the edge of the ruler with your fingers. There's not that tactile like feedback, so just be careful if you're going to use this type of ruler. Okie dokie, so now that I have a whole bunch of 2.5-inch wide strips cut, I need to start sewing them together into one long strip. Now, important to note, I did not care too much about when I was cutting if there was any messy little things like this, because I can just go in with scissors right now and chop it off. To be entirely honest, this style of making a rug slash, well, technically dog bed slash basket is very forgiving. The strips just have to be like approximately 2.5 inches wide, and the ends don't really matter. Now, I am just going to go random with this order because it's like late and I do not have the brains to not be random and to put thought into this. Also, I don't think my dog cares. So I will have this strip to start, and I will take this strip and I will lay it perpendicular to this strip. Now, very important, I like doing it so that a little bit of this pokes through and this pokes above a little bit so that I can see where they intersect, because I have to sew from corner to corner. And now I have to sew from this corner to this corner so that after I unfold it, it will go out and be straight, because if I sew it from this corner to this corner and unfold it along that diagonal, it's going to go that way and not be one long straight strip. I did that one time and for like an entire strip of things. Well, the first time I did it, and then I never did it again because I learned my lesson. So from one corner over, so I just sew until I'm on this a little bit. I don't have to worry about back stitching because this is going to get re-sewn in a way where this should be secured down. One corner to the other corner, and now I have this end of this strip. I'm going to flip it so it is right sides facing up. I'm going to take whatever my next strip is and place it right sides facing down like this, and then sew from corner to corner again. I like to sew onto this a little bit before I like shift this around to make sure I'm going in the right direction. Always remember, worry about one thing at a time. From there, it's basically just keep doing that for all the strips that you have, and yes, this does take forever. Alrighty, after a lot of sewing, oh gosh, the strips are all sewn together. So now we have to do the next step in the process. As I was sewing these strips together, I didn't lift my presser foot or cut any of the threads in between the pieces. So this is something called chain piecing, and now there's little tiny bits of thread in between every single one of these seams. So I got my fabric scissors right here, and I gotta snip these threads so that they're detached, and then I have to cut away this excess seam allowance. Now, pro tip, before you start cutting away excess seam allowance, you should double check that your strips did successfully get sewn to be a straight line instead of doubling back on itself. Otherwise, you're going to be halfway through cutting all your seam allowances off and then realize you did it wrong and be extremely annoyed that you have to go back, seam rip everything, and waste more fabric by cutting more stuff off. Just ask me how I know that. Anyway, so now you just have to do that for literally every single tiny little seam that you sewed and all of the chain pieces and all of the seam allowances. A bit later, and you should have one very long strip of scrappy stuff. And now that I have this, I need to cut myself some strips of batting. Now, the strips of batting are going to go inside these strips of fabric. So my strips of fabric were 2.5 inches wide. And depending on how wide my batting is, I usually cut my batting at about 2 inches to, sometimes if it's really thick, 1 inch. The reason for that being is having a smaller amount of batting than how wide your strips are makes it a lot easier to put the batting inside the strips. If you have a thicker batting, by having it slightly skinnier, again, it makes it easier to put inside here, whereas a thicker batting, having it slightly wider, means that it will like fit in here and give it the puffiness that you want it to have. And the reason why I have to switch between the numbers is basically just because I use scrap batting for this. I'm using scrap fabric, use scrap batting, use up all your scraps. You might as well. It's better than tossing them, and cheaper, and just better for the environment as well. For example, this is a scrap piece of batting that came from my Halloween quilt. If you're curious what that is, you should check out my Instagram. And it's a pretty chunky batting. So because this is so chunky, I'm going to be cutting this at approximately 1 inch. And I'm honestly just going to go at it with scissors because I don't need this to be any sort of exact measurement. The exact measurements just are not important when it comes to this project. And cutting this fluffy of a batting with my rotary cutter is just kind of annoying. Snip, 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 snip. Once I have my batting cut, I have to put it inside my strip of very long scrappy fabric. Now, when I am first starting it, what I like to do is have this a little bit away from the top so that I could fold the top down, fold the two sides in like so, and then fold it in half one more time in the same way double fold bias tape is folded. As you can see, this is kind of fiddly, which is why having a thinner strip of batting when it is an especially thick puffy guy is very helpful. Once I've got the very, very, very beginning folded, all I'm going to do is I'm going to stick that right underneath the sewing machine and get the needle down. Once that needle is down, it acts like a pin, which pins this section together, so then I can focus on making the next section look nice. At which point, I can turn on my sewing machine and do my back stitch and sew up to where I've made it look nice. Once I reach this point, I can arrange the next section. Sometimes with puffy batting, I even like to pull on it a little bit to help it stretch out and, again, fit in here a little bit better. Fold to the middle, fold in half, make sure everything looks nice, sew up to that section. And I just keep doing this for forever. Now, some people at this step, they like to sew in the middle. So I personally like to sew on the edge of this width of this thingamabobber because I think sewing on the edge means I have more of a chance of making sure I'm catching those folded edges and I don't accidentally have any raw edges peeking out. But I've definitely seen people sew in the middle and it works out perfectly fine as well. Honestly, if you're a little bit wibbly wobbly and all over the place, that works as well because we're going to be doing more stitching later on to hold everything in place. Now, whenever I come to a section where my batting is about to end, what I do is I just grab a new piece of batting, place it right here, and then I do that same fold sort of situation, but I am holding on to the section of new batting. So the section of new batting gets held in place, whereas this section up here of old batting that has already been sewn down is held in place by the stuff ahead of it. I sew, and I keep holding on to this new piece of batting, and I just keep sewing until I get to here. And now this new piece of batting is held in place by the stitching. And now I just keep going like normal. Fold, 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 shove, 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 so everything's nice. And, oh, come on, stitch. So after about forever and a day, you should end up with a whole bunch of this puffy duffy stuff. And this puffy stuff is what you're going to make, well, what I'm going to make, what I'm going to use in order to make the domey beehive shape thingy of the dog bed. Now, you will note that I have not actually completed using this entire roll because I don't have to. I don't know how much of this puffy stuff I'll need, and I've done a back stitch here. At any point, I could go on, continue adding more batting. If I use up all of this fabric, I can go in and add more strips of fabric. So this is a very forgiving project. If it doesn't work, it will work because I will make it work.
Over here, though, what I need to do is I need to start coiling this into a circle. So I am going to do it, I think, this way, where I'm going to start off with it as a circle and do a few straight stitches before I do anything else, because starting these kinds of things is always the hardest. I am starting at the top of the beehive slash dome, and after I've got this, I'm just going to go, don't forget your back stitch, straight forward across the entire thingy, and then straight backwards until I'm in the middle, and then I'm just gonna pivot. Watch your fingers when you do this. You do not want to accidentally snag a finger underneath the needle. Yeah, come on, cooperate. There we go. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch my machine to a zigzag stitch. And what's going to happen is it's going to stitch onto this part and then onto this part, and then it's just going to keep building up. I'm also going to lower my stitch length, because if I don't lower my stitch length, this thing will essentially just travel too fast and I will lose control of it. I want to be able to maintain control to make this guy continue stitching around in a dome, in a circle. Now, I must squish this as I sew. And the reason for that is as I coil this out, the inside curve against this is going to be smaller than the outside curve of this piece. So if I do not squish this inside part, my currently flat circle, which is what I want it to be, is going to start becoming a bowl very, very quickly. So I must squish. You gotta bully the fabric. And now I also see this part, it's starting to curl up. I am forcing it to be flat as it gets sewn to the next piece, so that this entire thing will end up more flat instead of round. Now, this is significantly easier to do if you have a flat surface to do this on. If you have one of those machines that only has like a little teensy tiny surface space to work on, this would be a lot more difficult. You can also see, I can also like take this out over to the iron and iron it flat while also steaming it, and that should also help it to be more flat. I'm gonna stop right here and I'm gonna backstitch, because all of this is on the right side of my needle, which is not good because there's a limit to how much throat space that I have on my sewing machine under here. Eventually this is going to get so big it's not going to fit under here. So instead I'm going to flip this over like so, put my presser foot back down before I continue stitching, and then that way everything as it gets bigger is going to build up on this side and I'm not going to have any troubles fitting it underneath. So I'm just going to keep going for a little bit, make sure to squish. And you see it's still wanting to dome up. So when I get over to here, I'm going to have to squish this flat as I sew again. Oh, I just missed a section over here. That's okay. It's actually very easy because I can just go back and re-sew that. Don't forget to backstitch. There we go. Now it's attached and I can keep going. Seriously? Oh, I ran out of bobbin thread. This project honestly uses up a surprising amount of thread, so it's a good chance to get rid of any little like tiny leftover spools that are almost done, as well as any bobbins that you have that are wound with colors that you don't often use. So then you don't ever end up with no empty bobbins when you have to wind a new color. Okay, I think that this top is approaching the size where it is big enough, and I want to start making it dome up, or dome. So I'm going to lift this ever so gently as I sew, so then it can start expanding at the angle that I want it to expand at. And I still don't want it to be too like 90 degrees. I want it to be a gentle curve out, so I am still squishing and forcing some of this fabric to be flat while I'm doing this. I want a gentle beehive. Okay, come on. Okay, this is becoming a bit too domey, so I'm gonna push it more flat as I'm sewing these next few rows. Alrighty, I'm looking at this right now, and it is approximately, I think, the diameter that I want this bottom part to be. No, I changed my mind. I'm gonna make it bigger. But before I do that, I want to make this dome a little bit more smooth. This kind of went like up and then, I don't know, I just don't love that. I want to force this top to be a little bit flatter. So in order to force it to be a little bit flatter, I'm gonna go back in here in the areas where it is going at an angle that I don't like and re-stitch it down in a more squished manner so that it is forced to be the shape that I want it to be. So, for example, here is an area where I wish it was flatter and it's creasing right here and in here. So I'm going to go in with my machine and stitch this to be more flat. So since I want this to be more flat, I'm going to stitch it in the area where it's popping up to force it to be more flat. And then here's another area I want it to be more flat. Now I think this area is where it needs the most attention, as well as there's a little hole right here that I gotta patch. So after much fussing and refinement, this is now, I think, an acceptable shape to me, although, to be entirely honest, I might go back and fuss with it a little bit more. I'm just cutting off some of the threads now, because sometimes I would skip from one section to another and just leave the thread intact. And if you leave the thread intact like that, you're gonna have to go back and snip it. Anyways, this is now the size and shape approximately that I want. I think my dog can very happily curl up into a dome of this size. So now I must go and start the little opening so that she can get into her little dome bed. And the way I'm gonna do that is I stopped right here. I'm just gonna, like, instead of continuing to go around, I'm going to make a 180-degree turn and start going the opposite way so that there is an opening here. Okay, it's gonna go like this. Doing this around a tripod is very awkward. And then we're just gonna go. Okay, I think I'm gonna actually pop this inside out like that so that it makes it easier. Okay, now I am back at where I first did my little U-turn right here. So I'm gonna leave a gap now. I'm gonna start with a smaller gap, like that size. So now I have to flip this entire thing 180 degrees so I can go back the other way, and instead of trying to shove it all underneath there, just flip it inside out. Don't forget to backstitch. Now I'm just gonna pop that out the other way again for ease of sewing purposes. There we go. And, oh, come on. Sorry, I got caught on that thread. Another thing that happens if you don't cut your thread is sometimes your thread gets caught on your presser foot, so then you have to snip it. Alrighty, and here I am back at the beginning again. I'm going to sew up, but slightly less. Maybe to like about there. Do my back stitch. And then lift, flip, flip, press your foot back down, back stitch, and pop this out so that I can go back the other way. Okay, so after doing the flipping 3 times, I'm now looking at this and being like, I think this opening is now big enough. So instead of like going a little bit back every single time when I flip it, so like flipping here, I'm gonna start just flipping right here so that it's like out and then straight down for the opening. I think this opening is, I think I'm going to go backwards and forth one more time, and then that opening is going to be the size I want it to, which means we're going to have to close up the circle again. So after forever of sewing, I now have a lovely little dome with an opening for the dog to go inside. Now I must take this part from this side of the dome and connect it back over to this side to the other side of the opening, and that is what will form my opening, and then I'm gonna like sew some more for the base for the bed part, like the cushion to go inside of. So back over here at the sewing machine, I've extended this to whatever distance I think the bottom of the opening should be and lined it up with my machine, and I'm just gonna backstitch. I'm gonna go all the way around. It's gonna be a little floppy at first. By the way, this entire time, my machine over here with where the bobbin winder is, I've been winding a bobbin as I'm sewing this entire time. Now, this bobbin is not yet full, which is kind of surprising, so I'm just gonna finish winding that. On this machine, once the bobbin is full, it's gonna automatically undo. Like that. So when I'm ready to switch bobbins, I'll just cut this, take it out, and then take my new bobbin and get it threaded. Like so, push it, and I'm gonna start winding this bobbin so that it's got enough that it's not gonna come undone, and then just clip that before I go back and continue sewing. So as I sew, this is going to be winding. Now back at the sewing machine, I'm just gonna backstitch and keep going all the way around. And now you can see I come back around to the beginning of where I first started to close this opening, and I'm just gonna keep sewing. Literally just keep sewing as if nothing is even happening. Okie dokie, so now I am ready to finish this guy off. So I am going to chop off any excess, and look at that, I only have a little bit. This will be used for some other project. And now I like to take this batting and I like to trim her down a little bit. Comme ça, and like this on this side. The reason I like to do that is so that I can do the exact same thing with the fabric. Like that. Maybe even chop this a little bit shorter so that I can fold it like this. Stitch up to there, and then in this smaller section, I can start tapering it so that this entire tube is smaller. And then I can fold this up, fold in the middle, and then fold in half at the end. And do you see how this is very tiny? It means by having this be super duper tiny, it means when I'm ready to sew this on, I can like taper it so that the place where it ends is like very small instead of an abrupt giant cutoff right in the middle of this chonky bit. Over here you see now I come towards the end of where I am sewing, where I made that little tapered bit. And now as I sew, right when I get to the end, I can overlap this just a little tiny bit. And since this is the inside, no one is going to see this. And if my machine cooperates, we can get through this tonight. There we go. Give it a good back stitch, and she's all done. Ta-da! Perfect. I hope my dog will like this. She freaking better like this. This took quite a few hours of my life. And we're not even done yet. So now that I've got the domey beehivey part of the dog hidey bed made, next up I gotta make like something to go on the bottom so that she is not just like falling out of the bed onto the floor, and then there's something to contain the cushion, which will be the thing after this that we make. Now this is a situation in which being a fabric hoarder really comes in handy, because there was an upholstery store that closed in my city, and there's some lovely heavyweight felt backed fabric. What is this? I don't know, but it'll work beautifully for this. Alrighty, so we got this guy on the fabric, and I am just going to make it approximately circle-ish. I'm gonna just draw an outline. I'm not going for anything exact. I'm just like, it has to be slightly bigger so that I can fold it up onto this thing. Other than that, we'll figure it out eventually. We got this approximate shape. And we're gonna cut that bad boy out. Start with a rough cut. And then I'm gonna see if I can fold this in half. And then in half again, because what I want right here is essentially something that is vaguely circle-like. There we go. Well, that's a bit more ovally than I'd pictured, but it'll do. Maybe we'll just like clean that up a little bit. And then I just have to attach the two. Back to the sewing machine, I guess. Okay, I have the sneaking suspicion I might end up having to hand sew part of this, but it's fine. I'm gonna turn my machine back to a straight stitch for this with a long stitch length. That way if I mess it up and need to rip it out, I don't have to rip my hair out while dealing with frustration of ripping this out. Okay. So I want it to like kind of like come over the edge and cup this bottom part a little bit. So I'm gonna line this up approximately with like the second row and stitch. Now, if you're thinking along this process that this looks really finicky and annoying, you're right. It was extremely finicky and annoying. And managing the rest of that and not stitching the wrong thing was, ugh. Cool. I have a sneaking suspicion I'm going to end up having to do something ridiculous to get this finished. I must apologize for the horrid camera angle, but I was preoccupied wrestling this stupid giant thing. Okay. That is as far as I could machine stitch it in this orientation. But, oh, I'm about to feel ridiculous. I think if I stick the opening in, it will allow me to stitch this thing all the way around. Oh gosh, come on. So I'm literally using the hole that I left for my dog to be able to get into the bed to go through it and stitch the inside of the rest of this bottom part. Alrighty, if it looks stupid but it works, then it's not stupid. Come on, come on. Go in. There we go. Okay. This is working surprisingly well. Okay, so the bottom is in fact stitched on now, and you can see I overlap that a little bit. And I had intended this to be the outside and then it just like cup over the top a little bit, but now I'm like thinking, what if I did it the other way, where the other side is actually the outside? Because the fun thing about doing it this way with the jelly rolls is that it can, technically speaking, be double-sided. Like, there is no such thing as a right side until you decide it. Because see, look, this, I feel like this looks a little bit cleaner. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the inside and I'm going to zigzag this top part down. So then that way it's more securely attached. And yeah, after that I'm going to make a cushion. And then I'll finish my dog bed. And then we'll have to see if the dog approves, which she's very picky. So she might decide to just not use it for like a week and then all of a sudden use it. Okay, it's kind of hard to see for both you and me, honestly, but I'm just putting this edge of this bottom piece of fabric in the middle of my presser foot and then zigzagging over everything so that it gets super held down. And I'm going through the opening of the beehive part to do it. Okie dokie, well, if I do say so myself, that's not bad at all. Now, I did go in with, after doing the zigzags on the raw edges on the inside, I did also zigzag down the outside edge of where the beehive part meets the bottom fabric, just to give it a little extra reinforcement. So now, I have to make a cushion to go inside here. And the cushion is basically just going to be a cylinder, like a short, fat cylinder that is approximately the size of whatever this bottom area is. Yeah, And then I'm going to stuff it with fabric scraps. So I am now back down on the floor on the same fabric I had before. And I'm just going to vaguely trace around the bottom of this beehive. Would have been a lot easier to do this before sewing it on, but you live and you learn. There we go. Now I'm going to cut this out. Like so. You'll notice I left a little bit extra around where I actually drew so that I could have seam allowance. So now I need to cut a second one of that and a nice big rectangle. All right, we got the circles and technically 2 rectangles because the fabric was not long enough for me to cut a long enough rectangle in one piece. So I'm just going to turn these 2 rectangles into 1 rectangle before sewing them onto the circles. Okay, now here's the tip. Don't sew the beginning of this. Leave the beginning of this rectangle free so that you have seam allowance to close it afterwards. And the reason why I'm not closing it right away is because I don't feel like measuring how long this circle is. So I'm just gonna start sewing it and be like, okay, perfect. I've reached the beginning again. That must be how long it is. I'm being incredibly loose in terms of seam allowance right now. When you first start sewing, seam allowance is so important, and then after a while, you just realize, oh, I could just ignore that. Unless I'm making an item that's like super duper fitted, that has to have precise measurements, that I did all the math for, there are ways to just make it so that you sew it to the right size and then cut off the extras, and who cares about seam allowance? Here's my first seam. Seam allowance is open. And then here is back at the beginning. So I definitely didn't need this much extra, but oh well. Nice to have it. Just in case. Okay, now here I can take this and fold this initial seam allowance back and stitch right up to there. There we go, stitch right up to there, and now I can chop off the extra of this rectangle. And now all I have to do is sew the other circle on, and this gap right here where that seam is going to be is what I'm going to use in order to stuff the thing. Now I'm starting to come back around to where I first started because this is a full circle, and now's a good time for me to like double check, am I gonna have the right amount of fabric, which it looks like yes I am. So that's a good thing to double check because otherwise you might end up with like not enough or too much fabric. Theoretically everything should be the same, but when you're operating with like iffy seam allowances at best, sometimes they're not. Honestly, since they're sewing on like a curve, which is always on a bias, sometimes the amounts aren't the same anyways, just because things stretch out. So it's good to double check. Yeah, sure. Once I get around to the beginning, I'm going to do the same thing as I did on the other side, and I'm going to make sure to backstitch and leave the seam allowance unsewn. There we go. Now I just got to turn this. Okay, so now I have this lovely deflated looking thingamabob. Now with circles like this, usually you have to like clip into your seam allowances in order to get things to lie flat, but whenever I'm sewing something where it's literally meant to be a cushion and it doesn't have to lie flat, a lot of the times I will not clip those seam allowances because I don't need this to lie flat. I want this to be puffy. I'm just gonna stuff this thing with literally fabric scraps from the projects that I've been using before, as well as some of the scraps from literally this project, because why not? The thing about fabric scraps though is you can't just like shove a giant thing like this in there, otherwise it's not going to be very comfortable. My dog is not super duper picky on the kind of surfaces she lies on, but she does need something slightly nicer than that. So I'm going to be cutting these bigger scraps into smaller scraps so that they will just float around inside a lot better and feel a lot more comfortable. And remember that seam where we first started and stopped? That is my hole to get the scraps in there. Boop. You could also use polyfill, of course, but I am trying not to spend any more money on sewing materials, including polyfill, unless I absolutely have to, or if I happen to stumble across a really great deal. So using fabric scraps is a great way to get around all this. Now I'm going to be here forever, so let's speed through this. This is also one of those situations you're gonna really want to make sure you have a sharp pair of scissors, because otherwise, oh my god, this is going to be annoying. You'll also see me stuffing things with like a whole bunch of like little tiny spaghetti scraps. That's my small scrap bin that I literally keep specifically for those tiny scraps that are not useful for anything other than stuffing. So I'm putting those smaller scraps in along with some of the bigger scraps, and that will help everything to be more puffy instead of just feeling like a lumpy pile of fabric. If you want to get smaller scraps, you could also use a rotary cutter in this section to chop these things up. It kind of goes a little bit faster with a rotary cutter, but I got lazy and just used scissors. Because this process is kind of hard on your rotary cutter blades as well, so I want to keep my nice sharp rotary cutter blades for later. This is actually my not so nice pair of scissors that I'm using to chop through everything here. Okay, so after just about forever, I finally managed to cut enough stuffing that this is like a decent amount stuff. This is now full of fabric scraps. Therefore, clearly this means this project cost me $0 since I had all the materials and it was mostly scrap stuff. So, yay for thriftiness. And after I finished stuffing it, I just used a slip stitch to stitch it closed. So now all of the stuffing is contained, and we must stuff this cushion inside the actual beehive part. Sorry, this is happening off camera because I cannot be bothered to adjust the cameras right now. Oh. Ignore the state of my floors. I definitely need to clean after this. But look at that! She's got a little cave now. I probably should go through and cut like all the little bits of thread and everything, but oh my god, I'm so excited. Jujin, what do you think? Look! Look! Oh, she does not care. She does not care. Look! Jenny! Jenny, look! This is for you! Okay, I got treats so that I can convince her. Look, Jenny! Jen! Look, there, yes, go into there. No, in here. Oh, there she goes. There, maybe. Has she, oh, no. Yes, there you go. See? Is good. Yeah. Well, I had hoped to end this video with her actually inside her new dog bed, but I don't think she's in a cooperating mood, because she never is in a cooperating mood, are you, June? So we're gonna end this video with me here sitting beside her new dog bed in the location where it is going to be, which is underneath my secretary desk, right next to the exercise ball that I use as a chair for my secretary desk. This was a very fun project. 10 out of 10. No regrets that I did it. We'll see whether she ever figures out how to use it and that it is for her. Maybe she'll just never use it, and this will end up in my other pile of projects that were not useful and therefore never see the light of day. If this style of chaos sewing is something that you enjoy, you should totally subscribe to my YouTube channel, and also you should check out my other social medias. I have an Instagram account that I've got linked, and I also have a Ko-fi page. So if you like my videos, I'd love it if you would buy me a Ko-fi or check out the Ko-fi shop. I got lots of other little thingamabobs out there. Also, thank you to the 3 people who consistently comment on my videos. I love reading your comments, and it's really nice seeing that people like my videos and they like watching it, because then it just doesn't feel like I'm just screaming into the void. I do scream into the void quite a lot, but some feedback is much appreciated. I'm sure you noticed I started trying transitions in this video, so let me know if I did a decent job at that, if they're a little bit overdone. I don't know. I figured I might as well try out some new editing stuff because I don't know what I'm doing, and the best way to get good at doing something is to just try it out and see what happens, which is what I did here. So I hope you go, try it out, see what happens. Maybe your pets will appreciate this more than mine did. I'll see you next time.